My name is Ginny, also known as 2/3 Lotus, everywhere on the internet. This clip is part of my series, The Poets of Twitch, where I analyze my viewers' writing live on stream. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as streamed with all of the imperfections and tangents that come with being live. If you want to catch me live or want more information, check out the description. Otherwise, enjoy some excellent writing. Why me? Submitted anonymously. Why me? I'm not saying I'm perfect. I know I'm not perfect. You loved me for it. Every imperfection. Every day I was the one. Was it true? I'll never know because you left, even though you said I was perfect. You saw the beauty in this monster. You saw her shine, but now the lights dimmed. You turned off the light when you left. You left me in the dark without your light. I couldn't keep on living without you by my side. The world must go on, you must go on, but promise me this. When you think of me, our time, our shine. Don't think of why you left. Think of me at my best. Think of us when we laughed, not when we went. Not when I cried, not when I begged. I think of how I was your perfect girl, like a goddess you said your perfect bride. Please think of me, and remember that, not goodbye. So, same as like the last poem from this person. This is a breakup poem. And it's good because coping with your emotions through poetry, like Charles Bukowski taught us half an hour ago, is a good way to deal with things. It's not like the sole way you should be dealing with things, but it definitely is good. So this is the context I have, and I mean it's fairly evident through the text that it's a breakup poem. And we're going to talk about, so I know this person, I don't know this person, I know this person wants advice on how to do poetry better, right? And so for me, well, there's a few things that advice specifically on a poem. I like to do a lot of deep analysis and really dig into the poem so I feel like I know what it's trying to say so I can understand it before I give any comment. This is fairly straightforward, and that's fine. I should show the specificity graph to this person. But there's also broader critique, or not broader critique, but broader ideas, broader advice on how to do well at poetry. I think there's a couple ways to teach someone about poetry, right? If you're looking to help a friend with poetry and teach them and provide them feedback, I think there are two ways. Two ways that I can think of. No, there's three ways. Maybe there's more. So one, you can look at their actual poems and do critique, right? This is going to give them immediate advice on their work and how they can do better. Number two, you can give them broad advice on poetry as a whole, right? Things like, oh, well, these are like metaphors and this is how you use them, and here are some forms and structures, and these are things you can learn. That's a way to learn poetry. And then the third way is also just point them toward reading, because this is a good way to improve. So I guess to you who submitted, I can give you these. I also definitely encourage you to do these, which we talked about last stream. And this is important as well. Reading, but, you know, I can give you these right now. And I mostly want to lean into this, because honestly, I think, again, for anyone like trying to help other people with poetry, if there isn't a great understanding of like the broader ideas of poetry and like all these techniques and stuff, I do think that a lot of the things we might initially critique over like a beginner's poem are going to be solved just from helping the beginner learn these things, right? So, and I think I talked about a few on your last poem. We discussed rhymes, we discussed intention, forms, themes, arrangement and structure, titles, but there's more. There's more to do. So, one of the things we're going to talk about is specificity, because of something I mentioned a second ago. And I know I'm totally like not reading the poem right now, but talking about broader things. I said it's pretty clear that this poem is about a breakup, even without like being given the context of this being a breakup poem. And that's not a bad thing, right? I'm going to read it one more time, just because I like to do that before I get too far off into my yapping La La Land. Also, that's a great movie. So here's why me, again. Before we talk about specificity, and I draw a graph that some of you have seen probably a dozen times now. Why me? I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not. I know I'm not perfect. You loved me for it. Every imperfection. Every day I was the one. Was it true? I'll never know because you left, even though you said I was perfect. You saw the beauty in this monster. You saw her shine, but now the light's dimmed. You turned off the light when you left. You left me in the dark without your light. I couldn't keep on living without you by my side. The world must go on, you must move on, but promise me this when you think of me, our time, our shine. Don't think of why you left, think of me at my best. Think of us when we laughed, not when we went, not when I cried, not when I begged. I think of how I was your perfect girl, like a goddess. You said, your perfect bride. Please think of me, and remember that, not goodbye. So I don't relate to this because I've only ever broken people's hearts. I'm always the one breaking up with others. There's been one time when it was mutual. Otherwise, I've done the breaking up with. I'm not saying that's a good thing. So, I said that this is fairly straightforward in its theme. And you might be like, oh no, she called my poem straightforward. That's like a bad thing. It's not, so don't worry. Because poems fall on all sorts of places on what I call the specificity graph. And this means, so this graph has an S on the bottom, and this means specificity, and it has an I on the top, and that means interpretations. So we have specificity on the x-axis, interpretations on the y. And that means as we get more specific, the amount of interpretations of our poem is going to change, right? And I think it looks something like this. This is what I've sort of decided through empirical testing and evidence, right? So if we are extremely specific, there aren't going to be very many ways to interpret our poem. And this is going to tend toward one theoretically. It's never going to get there. But the idea is the more specific you get, the more likely it is people will read and come to the same one conclusion, right? Whereas if you get a little less specific, you have more metaphor, you have more room for interpretation, right? You're going to have a greater number, right? I said it, leave room for interpretation. You're going to have more interpretations in that sense. And of course, as we keep decreasing our specificity, there's going to be more possible ways to interpret our poem. Now, the big thing about the specificity graph is that this graph is not a graph of quality, right? Not quality. Because you can have poems here that are hyper-specific, talking about something, describing it simply, and this can be a great poem. You can have something here that's extremely broad and metaphorical and say many, many, many different things with very, very few words or something, and that doesn't make it any better than anything else anywhere on the graph. This side of the graph is like, I think I have this side represented as being so non-specific that you're almost like uninterpretable. Uninterpretable, right? Where, and really it should be much steeper. But I think this is only like the sort of negative quality part of the graph, where if people really can't understand what you're saying, then or just can't draw anything, then we're probably not gonna do too well, right? So, but generally it doesn't really matter. So just know when I say that like a poem that describes a breakup very simply is not a bad poem. It's just a more specific poem, right? Or not simply, but specifically. Where, you know, you could talk about a breakup entirely using a metaphor of some vastly different non-love related thing. You know, I don't know, there's probably a world where I could take the action of writing, of sharpening a pencil and making that about a breakup. Probably possible. But you'd have to get pretty metaphorical with it. And then you would end up less specific, and people might take vastly different interpretations. Right? So, you're somewhere over here, and that's fine. Admittedly, less specific poems, more specific poems are useful in different settings, I would say. More specific poems are great in contexts where people are not spending that much time with your poem. I think these are great on like TikTok, short form settings, where like if you go on TikTok, the most like successful poetry people are the ones writing like short, specific poems, usually describing something straightforward, often about like love, because that's the kind of people who watch poetry channels. It might not be seen as the most like academic, right? But that's okay. That doesn't matter. Again, where you put your poems, where your poems succeed is not a matter of quality. I'm not even all that opposed to the idea of like insta poetry or whatever. That we haven't really talked about it and looked at it on stream before. I'm not saying this is. I'm just yapping. And then things that are more broad, more metaphorical, they might be seen as kind of more technical, but they at least need a space, a slower space. So these are going to work better when you're published. They're going to work better in a place where people are really going to take time with your poem. whenever I post these poems on TikTok, which I do, they don't do well because people don't got time for that, right? So this is an idea, right? So I just want to direct you, the author of this poem, toward this concept because it is very useful in like looking at your poems and understanding that there are different ways to write, and they're also all pretty equally valid, right? And just because this is, a specific poem about a breakup, clearly about a breakup, unquestionably, perhaps, about a breakup, doesn't have a qualitative implication. So here's that. I need to go to the bathroom again because I drink a lot of water and I'm also on spironolactone. So I'll be right back. Don't watch these ads. Hello, I'm back. I'm still Ginny, still known as 2/3 Lotus. This is Harper. Yes. Say hi to Harper. He's a good boy. Okay. Let's do more poetry now. Why me? Trying to think what else. Oh, so we'll talk about repetition again with this poem because you use it here. So I'm just going to read through this. I'm going to look at some of the tools that you already are using and using well. Why me? Submitted anonymously. Why me? This also maybe is Arson Asher's title again. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not. I know I'm not perfect. You loved me for it, every imperfection. Every day. I was the one. Was it true? I'll never know because you left even though you said. I was perfect. Johnny Devil, welcome. I'm doing well. How are you? You saw the beauty in this monster. You saw her shine, but now the lights dimmed. You turned off the light when you left. You left me in the dark without your light. I couldn't keep on living without you by my side. The world must go on. You must move on. But promise me this when you think of me, our time, our shine. Don't think of why you left. Think of me at my best. Think of us when we laughed, not when we went, not when I cried, not when I begged. Very, very, very repetitive. This is a tool. Right, this is a tool we use in poetry. Repetitive is not bad necessarily. I think how I was your perfect girl, like a goddess, you said your perfect bride. Please think of me and remember that not. Goodbye. So much repetition. And repetition is a great tool because repetition gives emphasis. I don't think I'm going to try to draw the repetition graph from last time. I didn't write the whole word. Repetition. I like that. I-T-I-T-I. Very, very repetitive. Interesting. Repetition. Repetition has emphasis, mostly, or it calls attention, right? Fundamentally, when you repeat, I mean, it's just a matter of the words on the page. You know, let's say we have a poem, right? And I'm drawing a graph. And we have all these different words, right? And generally we're going to have a pretty even balance of like the amount of words in a poem or the amount of times a word is used, right? Each word gets used roughly the same amount, you know, once or twice, unless we're talking like or the, right? But then if we repeat a word, if we have it take up a larger percentage of the poem relative to the rest of the words in the poem, that is just fundamentally going to lend importance to this word. Not even through any meaning or emotion in it, but just because there's more of it, right? And then if we keep repeating, it's going to remind us, like, this is the important word. And I don't know the extent to which you can do this, right? Before it just gets obnoxious. Like, I would love to know if anyone has good examples of a poem of repetition where, like, half of the poem is using a single word. I would love to see that. That sounds fascinating. Maybe I should try to write that. Maybe you should try to write that. And I don't know how effective it gets, because sometimes repetition is sort of diminishing returns, where you repeat something 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and it's like fine, because it feels reasonable. But as you get into like repeating something more, it can get to be like obnoxious and annoyingly repetitive, right? We'll talk about repetitive things, repetitive sounds in our lives as annoying. So we need to be careful in our use of repetition. And I don't think you have any major issues in your repetition. There might be a few cases, but mostly you're falling somewhere around like a safe amount of repetition. Just by my ear, by my taste. But repetition, I think we really should think hard about, because you don't want to use repetition on a word that you don't want to draw importance to. I feel pretty strongly toward this, because, you know, if we're looking at this graph, right, this just looks at the words in terms of like the number the submission should be working. No one has mentioned problems. So this is just a graph looking at, you know, the number of times a word is used in a poem, right? And how that lends inherent importance. But we also, sometimes, if we're to draw another graph, that's a curve, I like that I can draw curves. I feel like I need to use that more for something. So let's look at some words, right? And we're writing a poem, and we have these different words. And as we're writing, some of them have a lot of emotional impact, just as words, and some of them have less. This could be a word like love or hate. I mean, actually, I really don't like these words that much, but maybe a word like never, right? It's a very strong word. It says like never. It's a strong word, right? Where words like this could be like the and like and like these sort of conjunctions and whatever. Words in between, maybe you have a word that's you, right? You at base level isn't a very emotionally charged word, but I think in poetry, if we take something like the word you and repeat it constantly or bring emphasis to the word you in a poem, it can make a word like this extraordinarily powerful. And I know this because someone has done it in a poem submitted, and I don't know if I'll be able to find it. I did. Brother. This actually uses her, right? Sorry, it's a little messy, but this was by Arson Asher, right? That's convenient. Except her. I don't hate her, but certainly not her. Her. And when we like bold it and when we bring emphasis to this word and repeat it, you end up doing this thing where a word like her can, by the end of the poem, have a great deal of emphasis upon it to the point where it is an emotional word, right? So in that regard, we want to be very intentional with the things we repeat, because it is naturally, repetition can often add emotion to a word, right? I think even like the, repeated and placed and brought attention to appropriately, could become an emotional word, especially used in contrast, which specifier I use, the or could have impact in a poem. Possible. So this is something we have to continue as well. Oh, may I ask you to delete the poem titled Excessive from your list? I submitted it and now I don't feel too strongly about it. Absolutely. I always ask before reading. That's why I like to have people here. That is one thing. If you submit anonymously, then I have to assume that the poem will always be there. But if you're in chat, you can definitely roll those back. You submitted as well, Stylish Fail. That's really exciting. Rare Stylish Fail submission. I'm stoked. That's fun. It's exciting. Anyway, back to this. So this tells us really that we just want to be intentional. And I mean, wanting to be intentional in poetry should be no surprise to you, given that like last time, I talked about like how we should interpret art intentionally. It's a shitpost you made in 3 minutes. Don't get too excited. Okay. I'm still excited. I can be excited over your shitposting. I think shitposting is really peak in terms of forms of art. So this intentionality is important in our repetition. So let's look at your poem. Right? So we have a few things we repeat. We repeat this whole like light, dark thing. Right? We repeat I'm not. And I do like this. Right? Not in this poem. I think we could actually use not more, just because it really talks about this idea of absence. Not as a word is referring to, something not being there, something being absent. And of course, given the broader poem being a breakup, I think not is kind of an effective word to repeat. Not, not. You're not here. I'm not this. I'm not. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not this. I'm not this. But you know, there are not. This is going to give a certain amount of power over to that word, right? Similarly, you use every here. You love me for it. Every imperfection, every day I was the one. And you like this sort of every just as a word and then every day. Combining those or like juxtaposing those is cool. But, I said down here that I find never to be a very emotionally charged word, and I think every is as well, because it is so broad and it is powerful in that breadth, right? Because this literally refers to like all things, right? All of the imperfections, all of the days I was the one. And this is sort of how love can feel. Also never. So you have never. I think never and every are functionally repetition when used in the same poem. But these work great with the idea of the poem because, of course, it has been shown that ever and every and never have changed. It was not permanent. It was not permanent in the way you hoped it would be, in the way this person said it would be, which I think like makes the said good as well. However, like in some cases with this repetition, like the world must go on, you must move on. I guess I just don't find that to be nearly as compelling within the context as a repetition, right? We have don't think of me, don't think of why you left, think of me at my best, think of us when we laughed, not when we went, not when I cried, not when I begged. And that's fine. Like, what they're going to think about when they're gone. Now that they're gone, right? So that's like fine. Trying to think about why I actually am not a huge fan of don't think of why you left, think of me at my best, think of us when we laughed, not when we went, not when we cried, not when I begged. So I think some of these words, so we have different kinds of verbs, like not all verbs are created equal, and I do think that think is kind of a weak verb. Think doesn't speak to any inherent emotion. Think, we can think, but we can reminisce and we can remember and we can ponder and we can intuit and we can logic and we can do these different things, right? Where think is just like think, which, and this is referring to like memory. So you could use a stronger word like remember, or you could try to include, right, some of your previous repetition. And this is something that I think I tend to suggest. Doing like a few repetitions of something here and there, I'm not personally a huge fan of. I would rather have like repetition going throughout. But you could Like literally here, do not think, right? Well, we already had like the I'm not before, so we could say think not of why you left. You could even go think not of me at my worst, think not of us when we cried. This would be a slight like reversal of this, but it would bring back some of our old repetition. And this is something I think I see kind of often in poetry, where we write down the page sometimes, like kind of feels like it was written down the page, which is how I write poetry, it's fine. But you'll start with an idea, this repetition of not, and then we'll go to a different thing. We'll have every, never, let's repeat that, said, and then we have the light thing, and then we have like different stuff. And it feels like we never really take time to connect back to the start of the piece, which I do think perhaps is going to be particularly effective here, since this piece is about memory, and it's about the past and the things we lost. And maybe calling back to the ideas at the beginning would actually give sort of that feeling of reminiscing, right? I tend to try to think about the poem itself as like an entire life, a being, and there are all these things contained within it, and if that's the memory or the looking forward or the spiraling or the grit, determination, a poem can be described in such ways as a sort of entity, and I think it has to be written intentionally to do those things. And if this is a sort of sentimental, looking back, melancholic kind of poem, it's not melancholic, it's loss, right? It's loss. It's been a while. Wait. Is it one? Is it that? Or is it the other way? Did I forget? Which way is loss? Is the one... Oops. Is the one there, or is the other way? not even a real fan. Oh, it's 1, 1, 1, 1. I see. Yeah. There we go. Right, because it starts with the one person, and then there's the two, and then there's the other two, and then there's the one. Yeah. Yeah, this is loss. This is loss. Is this loss? Is this poem loss? This poem is loss. So we want to... I need to Control-Delete unironically. This is my greatest confession. Don't do that. So this poem is on loss, and loss is this process of remembering and sort of struggling and meandering through things. And I think that remembering of things lets us tie back really effectively in a poem like this. I was young and stupid. Oh, past tense. I've learned and grown. So yeah, if your poem's about loss, then make it embody it, right? If you have an emotion that we're trying to evoke, embody the emotion through the entirety of the poem, through the structure, through the way we write, through what every little thing we're doing. And I think this is Bukowski's Bim Bim Bim, which that's a quote from Charles Bukowski. He says that every line should go bim bim bim, it should move forward, it should have life. And I think that's more to say, or I think, if we're trying to talk about something, then every line should I think, this is an opinion that not all agree with, should show us this thing. Some don't agree. But then again, if we're trying to write a poem that, like, we don't want to show loss in every line, then maybe it's because we have a different objective in our poem and we just need to show a different feeling throughout the whole thing, right? It's not that our poems should be singular ideas, but they should be full and deep evocations of the underlying ideas that we want to communicate. Sorry, big words. Poem should say the thing poem is trying to say in every line. So there's that, right? What else do I like to talk about as broad ideas in poetry? So we talk about repetition, we talk about specificity. I'm talking about maybe a few specific things that I would change, just like little bits that could like, oh, that makes sense. That's why you would do this. Maybe that can help you understand. Please think of me and remember that, not goodbye. So, and remember that, not goodbye is just sort of word soup, right? Because we don't have punctuation here, we don't have spacing, right? And remember that, right? You're trying to say remember that being like the positive stuff, the girl, the goddess, not goodbye. So we need some sort of punctuation, generally, but if we don't want to punctuate, if we don't know how to do punctuation, poetry really saves us if we don't want to punctuate correctly, because we don't need to. We can just move this down here. Not goodbye. And that's also going to like give emphasis to this line. Please think of me and remember that. Not goodbye. Right? We don't want them to remember goodbye, not goodbye. We want them to remember that. So why not separate these ideas? Separation is going to give things weight in the same way that kind of repetition does, where repetition shows the thing to our eye more prominently, and that we'll notice think, we'll notice said, never, every day, ever, not. These things are noticed because they're placed more prominently for us. And giving something its own line does functionally the same thing. Because, well, if we go back to this graph, right? Let's say instead of talking about a whole poem and the distribution of words, we're talking about a line, right? We have one line of a poem. We'll do another graph again. It's the same graph. It's just different. We have one line of a poem. And this graph represents all the words in it, right? So if I have one word, right? If I have one word, it gets all of the attention in the line. If I have two words, they each have to share half of the attention in the line. There is Drowning Devlin, we didn't do it. And if you have three, each word gets a third of the attention in the line. If you have four, each word gets a quarter of the attention, which makes these words less noticeable. Yeah, I'm really bad at remembering these things, but we're not going to be on this poem for too much longer, I don't think. Well, maybe we will. I'll put it up after this thought. Or Nico can write that we're reading Why Me, submitted anonymously, and pin it. But you don't have to do that. And of course, as we get to like a super long line with, say, 10 words, we're really splitting up the attention. Right. I mean, it's just pinning a message. I know you can unpin messages. So if we take something like not goodbye, right? Or not on a line, goodbye on a line, it means the sort of vertical real estate that we have on the poem of like line, one word getting as much, again, vertical real estate in the poem as a bunch of words together on a line with multiple is going to make that word feel more important, right? So there. Hey, good job, Nico. Thank you. Appreciate it. Uh, so this is why, changing the lines or like having something on its own line is going to give something more meaning, right? Which makes something like you said, it was perfect. You saw the beauty in this monster. It really gives emphasis to those you saids because each two words is an entire line. They get that much. I was perfect. You saw the beauty in this. Oops. Line break. Monster. Monster on its own line. You don't have to do that. But that would, let's say you want to really give emphasis to the fact that you are a monster and this person saw the beauty in you. You referring to the poem you. Or you referring to the I. That if we put monster in its own line, the subject of the poem, it's really clear that they are saying like, I want to be seen, or I want to emphasize the idea that there's like this monster, right? In the same way that, why me? I'm not saying I'm perfect. Now, if you do this too much, you end up with like a very tall poem that gets too long, and I admittedly don't like too many one-word lines throughout. I think they break up the flow. Like, you have to be careful with it, because lines that go across the page have a very nice flow to them. I couldn't keep on living without you by my side. It's all one thought here, but you left me in the dark without your light feels like two thoughts. And if they were all on their own lines, you left me in the dark, right? I would almost read this like that if I saw a poem, because there is this sort of automatic implication that these things each have their own weights. You left me in the dark. And of course there's some power to like one line, or one word. You can't do it for a whole poem. Well, you can. But, and I have a poem that sort of does this where it's like 1 to 3 words every line. So I can't even say that I don't necessarily like it in a poem. Because the point is that each line is supposed to be its own kind of complete thought. And there is supposed to be that breaking up, right? So, and that means if you have like a part you really want to emphasize every word of a sentence, you can do it like that, vertically, right? These are ways to arrange your poem that are going to change the emphasis. So that's like an important thing to consider. So, and I think not goodbye, or even not goodbye at the end of your poem, like this feels like it's something that you're really wanting to say. You're pointing toward, the idea of memory, the past, the good things that they noticed, and how you want this to remain. So, definitely, consider that, right? And in general, consider that as a poet, the way that vertical spacing and horizontal connection impacts your poem. And I don't feel like I talk often enough about how keeping things consistent across the line and not having that vertical space can create really good flow. I feel like it's pretty common, I would say, in like modern poetry to be very vertical and then not very horizontal. But some things want to be horizontal. It's different. So let's look at music. I think music is a great metaphor for this. Fairly smooth. I'm not a pianist, but it that's a really bad scale. And then, right, reverb is on. Those evoke different things, right? Very, very, very different things. I'd probably give you a better, more emotional example on the saxophone, but I'm not going to do that right now because I could actually play music. Why is loss on the page? Because this poem is about loss. So sometimes it does make more sense to have your poem go verses. And of course you can change it. Right, that's a way to write your poem. And I think looking to different artistic disciplines really helps us as poets because, these ideas on horizontal and vertical pacing come literally from my time as a music major playing the saxophone. So it is important to have this balance because if everything is very vertical and we write our poems like this, there's a space for that, and you might be able to express a poem really beautifully like that. But, even if you look at emulating speech, right there, speech, I stopped, I paused, because that's the point of the sentence. But everything in between sort of is this flow to get to the things that I really want to emphasize. And if I'm in the middle of the sentence and I stop and I break up an idea in a place that doesn't feel natural, it's really going to mess with your head. And it messes with my head as the speaker too. So these things give insight on how to write poetry, right? Use everything as insight. Music, speech, thought, art, and in the visual sense, dance, right? Maybe you want your poem to look like a dance or read like a dance. How would you do that? And this sort of gets to the point of where some people check out and they're like, oh, that's like wishy-washy artist stuff, where they say like, right, like you're dancing across the page. It's kind of true though, because if you want to express something light and something danceable, then why wouldn't you try to write and express like a dance, right? Like that at least makes sense to me. and I think that's like an important thing to sort of look at when you're approaching your work. So try to find these ways to feel pacing, to feel your work, because really it's not about the actual technique I'm using. Like, you get feeling from that. You don't, obviously some people will say, a musician will say like, oh, that one's staccato, this one's legato, these are the differences, how you would play it. But at the end of the day, one sounds like this, and one sounds like this. And your poems can do the exact same thing. So all art is great because all art informs all other art. And you look at a lot of the great artists. Let's talk about, if we say the Renaissance man, even just as an archetype, I don't like that it's man, but Da Vinci he sketched and did technical drawing, he did painting. I think he had some skill in music, and he also did mathematics and biology, right? And was able to use sketching alongside with biology to like find connections. In architecture, he has like bridges that he would draw. And everything is going to inform everything else in your art. So it's very important to like do that, to do different things. So if you're a poet, yes, be a poet, but also like use the things, if you're a student, use the things you learn in school and make your poetry that, or make that your poetry. and then learn other art, learn other ways to write. You know, I talk about how I'm bad at writing prose and I hate prose, and I really should just learn how to do it because I can and I'm capable. Uh, because we're all capable of learning all things, mostly, kind of, given time and effort and motivation. Um, but like, I probably lose out in my poetry by whining about not being able to write prose. Because if I could write prose, it'd probably teach me a lot of things about poetry. So definitely don't stifle yourself. I mean, definitely keep writing poetry because like it's off to a good start. It feels like very instinctually, intuitively using these tools like repetition, bringing out certain ideas. You do have short lines here and long lines here. Like you do it. And I think we can just add additional kind of intention and interest to those things, right? I'd probably do better with prose, but I read poetry better, or my performance is better. Probably do better with prose, but I read poetry. Well, prose isn't a performative form. Like people don't perform prose. And there's a reason, right? Like an audiobook, I mean, some people would call it a performance. It's a performance in some sense, but like, you know. And that's also why it informs us, because there are limitations to the art forms we use. You wouldn't go up on a stage and read a novel. Not just because of length. It's like extremely short. I don't know. And prose poetry. It's poetry. It's all poetry. Prose poetry, the point is that you can bring it up on stage because it is poetry. Even though it's prose. Spectrums, not trying to draw hard and fast lines and limit you all. If you want to go on stage and read a novel, I mean, by all means try, right? I just wouldn't vote with confidence. So yeah, so we talked about, between these, titles, rhymes, themes, structure, repetition, specificity, intention multiple times, spacing, which is structure as well. So I think you, anonymous submitter, friend of Arson Asher, have many things to think about and many ways you can look at trying to improve, right? And this is good. I also don't want to overwhelm you with ideas and thoughts because that can get a little bit much, right? And if you have too many ideas going around, you're just going to shut down. So I tend to encourage this if someone's like submitting a lot to me. Like I think Arson Asher had a few back-to-back, Penguin, and I said like, cool, now go like write for a while and then take all these ideas and really dig into them and dig into each of them and all the random offhand suggestions I say and any inspiration that you might have come up with from this, right? Because there's probably a lot, and as a new poet there's probably a lot, and go do research and go learn and go enjoy it. Enjoy it, first of all. First and foremost. Don't write poetry. If I suggested something and it doesn't sound fun, like don't do it, because it's not going to be fun for you, and that's going to inform things like your style. So it's probably why I don't write prose. I don't have fun with it. So yeah, take all this and really run with it, because I think there's like, I know I didn't talk a lot about this poem, and I guess that goes back to this. We have lots of ways to learn. You know, we can read, we can get critique direct on our work, we can get broad advice about poetry, we can do other forms of art, we can just live more life. this is an unfortunate thing, that the more you live, the more you know, and the more experience you have. And we do see artists mature, right? That's just how it works. Later into a career, we usually see changes. Sometimes people don't mature with the artist. Sometimes people don't change with the artist, and, they lose support. Some people try to stay in what was successful. Sometimes they succeed in that. But it's a whole mess either way, right? So, but I guess, I don't know. My advice to anyone who wants to do poetry is really to dive into it. And maybe that's just because I have and I really love it. And if that sounds like a lot, then you don't have to. Also, I guess, is something I need to remind myself to encourage people that poetry can be a casual thing. Poetry doesn't have to be what I showed right now, and that goes for everyone, right? It's what I show because it's what I like out of poetry. I like the detail. I like connections. I like making graphs about it. That also doesn't have to be it. And it can be something you do in your spare time and write on the corner of a napkin or in the back of a notebook or post on TikTok and just a casual thing. It doesn't matter, I guess, how you approach it. But I do think you should be doing it. And I would encourage you to keep writing because it feels like it's something, this poem, that other poem, are probably things that helped you. And why not do things that help us, right? Here's Why Me, submitted anonymously. Why me? I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not. I know I'm not perfect. You loved me for it. Every imperfection. Every day I was the one. Was it true? I'll never know, because you left even though you said I was perfect. You saw the beauty in this monster. You saw her shine, but now the lights dimmed. You turned off the light when you left. You left me in the dark without your light. I couldn't keep on living without you by my side. The world must go on. You must move on. But promise me this when you think of me, our time, our shine. Don't think of why you left. Think of me at my best. Think of us when we laughed, not when we went, not when I cried, not when I begged. Think of how I was your perfect girl, like a goddess. You said your perfect bride. Please think of me and remember that, not goodbye. Why me? Submitted anonymously. It was really fun to read that the second time. Thank you for submitting. Thank you for submitting that. It was fun to read the second time. I think I was able to get some more of the emotion out of it, which is good. See, I like the poem more over time, so I read it with more emotion. Thank you for watching. I encourage you to check out the rest of the series, follow if you enjoyed, and stop by Twitch if you want to share your own work. See you there.